Welcome everybody to the next school board budget meeting on Tuesday, March 20th. Today we are going to begin, I think, with maybe a refresher from Catherine, I believe. Is that possible?
Yes.
Just because our last budget meeting was condensed, and then we're going to use the majority of the time today to discuss as a board, how we're feeling, what questions we have, what questions we want to get answers to in the future. So it's going to be pretty informal today.
I think what we sort of discussed a little bit also is we want to sort of talk about the budget as a whole and what we may think, what the whole size of it looks like, how we might fund that, what one of the things we've talked about do we actually may want to add in, and if there's other ones we think we may need to take a closer look at, where we are as a board now. It's all out, it's all sort of what's in, what's out, and has been sort of explained. We can now sort of address it as a whole and then put it in context.
Yep. Great. Thank you. So
Okay.
Catherine, I don't know, were you prepared to?
Well, I'm prepared to go over the budget highlights and the appropriation budget master kind of together. So to
Okay.
give you the overview that we didn't get a chance to do
That'd
at the
be
very
great.
beginning.
Thank you.
So what I would recommend, as I said, I'm going to try to go through the budget highlights and the appropriation master report together, so then get you familiar with how the accounting software does the reports, and that's helpful for your regular monthly financial statements and stuff like that. So the budget highlights is page 31 through 36 of the binder, and I pulled that out so I can kind of compare side by side with the appropriation budget master report, which starts on page 3 of the handouts binder. So the budget highlight sheets only show the items that with an increase of over $5,000 and a change percentage of 6% or more. Because like a lot of the salary lines, the increase, if you take page 3 of the appropriation budget master report, the salary line for the teachers, the very top line, it's over $50,000, but it's only a 2% increase. So that, to me, even though it's a large amount, and it's overall from year to year is not a big increase. So I didn't put anything like that in there. These are just the items that the amount and the percentages were big compared together. So the first item that fell into that category was on page 3 of the appropriation master report, and it's it's numbered 1020 salaries ed techs. There is over $14,000 increase, 12%, and that's because we did hire some new ed techs that came in with more experience than we budgeted. So that tends to happen. When we budget, we try to pick a middle-of-the-road amount, and we always try to budget for full benefits for them, and sometimes, hopefully if they come in with more experience than what we budget, they take less benefits. So we always try to hope that they kind of offset each other. Doesn't always work that way, though. And the next item that you see a big increase is benefits teachers on page 3, account number 2010, and that's 10% increase or $63,000. We are budgeting 8% increase for health insurance for everybody, so that's one reason why there's already a big increase. And another why it's even more than 8% on this is because people change what their benefits are. They may have a baby, they may adopt somebody, they may get married, so they change their benefits, and so that's why this is an increase of even more than 8%. But then on the next line, which is number 2020, benefits for ed techs, there's a decrease of 25%, $18,000, because the new person we had took less insurance than what we budgeted. So there's always that kind of give and take back and forth.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
The 8% increase for health, can you remind me, last year, was it?
We started at 8% and it ended up coming in at like 1.6 or something like that. So we were able to reduce the budget because we found out
That's what I thought.
before. And we're hoping We did get an email from our health insurance company recently, and they have a tiered system, and the highest increase possible is 9%. So both Howard and I are crossing our fingers that we don't get hit by 9%. The last several years, the highest increase we saw was 6%. So I'm hoping.
Did we get that number?
They hope to get it to us by the first week in April for the health insurance increase.
So we'll have an updated sheet before we vote?
Well, yes, I hope so. As soon as I get that figure, I will be changing those, lowering them, I hope.
One way or the other?
One or the other. Yeah, yes, exactly. So to continue on with our budget highlights, the next item is 8,700, 6,100, which is supplies. It's also on page 3 of the appropriation budget master, and that's a decrease of 18%. But the next account right below it is books, and that's an increase of 14,000 or 70%, because there are certain books that they wanted to purchase, but they reduced the supply line to help offset that increase to books. So they were trying to work to try to keep it as flat as they could. And so on the budget highlight, the increase after that is it's under guidance, Pond Cove. It's the salary line under guidance, and there's a 45% decrease. And that's because a social worker was paid for out of last year's budget, and this year it's being paid out of special ed. So it got moved. Yes.
Can I back you up on the book question for a second? Do we track how current or how out of date our books are? Because it's sort of like one of those things like, as soon as you buy that book, eventually it's going to be out of date, and you're going to need to replace it. So just to sort of have a vision down the road, what else is out there. And these are the kind of expenses that sometimes get pushed down the road too often to our detriment. We have some very, very old textbooks, I know, but do we have an idea of where we stand in terms of how current or how out of date these assets are?
It depends, I think, on the subject and the class, because some of the subjects that we bought new textbooks this past year, the year before, and some textbooks I know that Jeff was speaking about are very old. So we kind of try to cycle through, but I can't tell you specifically.
Maybe the principals have
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Well, I was sort of wondering, do we track it kind of? Is it visible?
Not by a hard
Yeah.
spreadsheet kind
Yeah.
of tracking system, nothing like that. So talking about guidance, the person is now going to be paid for out of special ed, because social workers can be paid for under regular instruction, or they can be paid for under special ed, and depending on what their primary functions are. If they're dealing mostly with special ed students, then they should be paid for out of special ed, and vice versa. And we were noticing that in Pond Cove, that social worker was dealing much more with special ed students than regular ed, so we moved it in the budget to be charged out of special ed. So the next big ticket item is on page 4 of the appropriation budget master, and that's under library and media, Pond Cove. The salary ed tech reduced by 100%, the salary for the ed tech reduced by 100%. That's because that person is part-time in that position, and we're proposing moving her to become the nurse aide, to help out with the nurses for paperwork and stuff like that. I understand this person is trained has some minor medical training. She's very organized, very good with paperwork and stuff. So talking to Jason, he felt that the library could handle not having her there. So we figured, I know the nurses have been requesting this for a while now, so we felt that would be a good use of that person's time. So we're not saving any money, we're just moving her from place to place, but we all feel that she would be a benefit to help the nurses.
There's a question.
Sure.
There's a question. Are we gonna go through page 30 with this? Is that how far it goes?
It actually goes to page, yeah, that was my intention, I'm trying to do it quickly.
What I'm wondering is, because of the time,
Yep,
would it be better to just simply stop at a page, let's say we'd be on page 4 or 5, and say, does anybody have any questions about anything on page 5? And then if there is a question, that gets answered. And if there isn't a question, we go to the next page. It's just that
Yeah.
To go through
That's
every
true.
one of these $15,000
take-
items would take an hour and a half.
Yeah, it would
And
take
we're only
a
here
while.
for an hour and a half. I mean, I don't know, I mean, do you like going through every one of these, or do we want to just say, does anybody have any questions about, and just go, systematically through each page? Would that be more useful to you or not? Or do you like the way it's going now?
Well, given, I think, the purpose of the meeting, I'd rather be more targeted, but I don't know, would like to see how everybody feels.
I actually like the idea of going through page by page and seeing if, and talking about ones that are exceptional or don't make sense. I think in many cases, when you're looking at things like, there was more or less benefits than we expected, they're very self-explanatory, and we can just.
Things like that, I can
move
just
on-
skip
on
over that.
past them.
Yep.
So do we sort of have a general consensus that we'll go through sort of by page and by interest level of the people who are here going through them? And so if we're gonna do that, I do have one question on the first page.
Okay,
What
yes.
page, page what?
On page 31 of 47, you're looking at the Cape Elizabeth Middle School, and just sort of trying to understand, second to bottom line, where you've got one employee moved from Pond Cove, and I looked up at Pond Cove, and there's an employee moved to the middle school, but the amounts are really different, so.
Oh, and actually, that is one of the errors in the report, because that's the person I was just talking about. They should actually be charged to special ed, social work, which is a Department Code 9026, which is later on, and, the amounts wouldn't be totally equal, because you're comparing what last year's budget was versus this year, and there are cost changes in benefits and cost changes in the salary amount and stuff like that. And also, it's a different person. We had a social worker being paid for out of general fund and Pond Cove, and they left us. And so this is actually a new person with a new amount being charged here, and now I'm confusing even more because it should be charged somewhere else.
So rather than saying it's just a little inaccurate in the description, it was reduced at Pond Cove, and it was increased at the middle school, it
Yes.
sounds like. So it's actually different positions and different people.
Mm-hmm,
Okay,
yep.
that makes more sense.
Okay, good. I'm glad somebody thinks so.
That's something we might get a little more detail on the principles. And so. Okay, that was all the questions I had on page one. Anyone else have questions on page one?
And you're referring to the budget highlight sheet,
Yep.
right?
Or aren't we going back to page 4 or 5?
So we're going through, I'm not sure how it's got
So-
these budget highlights.
So if you
Do you have
go to the
this?
end of your detailed
Page
budget.
31.
On page
Yeah,
31,
she's just
Howard.
going through this
I
piece.
see.
Yep. And she was referring to the detailed page that related to the budget highlight.
Yeah, we were just gonna go
Yep.
through
Oh, this list, I thought you were going.
No, no, no.
that
Yeah,
way.
no.
Okay, fine. Then forget what I said, I guess.
So, well, I
That's why I
still
didn't
think,
understand
I
that.
still
I-
But
think,
this
hoping
is
we
still
would go
6
through-
pages
I
long.
I totally
Get the
agree. I
highlights.
just thought, oh, we're gonna go through page by page, 30
No.
pages.
No.
But I think
No.
your point is that we're not gonna necessarily wanna question everything
No.
on the,
Right.
even
even on
these
the high
highlights.
level. one,
No,
right.
because a lot of
Because I think
them are
a number
pretty
of them are
straightforward.
self-explanatory.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess on page 31, the charge for the MDOE guidelines of online subscriptions,
Mm-hmm.
that's brand new, it's a new charge, that's not something we normally get?
Well, it's a new account coming. The money is not necessarily new. It's money, it's to pay for, like, online, we have a lot of things that we go online to use, and you have to pay annual subscriptions for them, and I can't tell you exactly what they are
Yeah,
because
sorry.
I don't use them. But, I mean, that's another principal question. But the DOE, the Maine Department of Education, would like us to charge those items to the specific account code. They used to be included either in supplies or other areas
Oh,
or
I'm sorry,
dues
it's a
and
new account.
fees.
Okay, I was thinking it was a new charge, but I get it.
No, it's a
Thank you.
new account.
Sorry,
And so we
I get
just
it.
moved some money from other accounts to charge that there. Because the reason why the regular report, and this goes for the monthly statements are all the same, because we have to report all of our expenditures to the Department of Ed, and they have to be in a certain account code.
Yeah,
And so
sorry.
they want it in this account code so they know how much we spend on online subscriptions. And that's why we have all these millions of accounts.
Thank you, I get that.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's
Should've
fine.
figured that out.
So should we move on to page 32? And as John said, a lot of this stuff is pretty straightforward. Like with special ed, the reason why you'll see decreases in one area and increases in the other area, because we're moving staff to follow the kids with the needs. So that's why you see increases, changes there. On salary for the substitutes at the high school, we increased that because of actual expenditures in previous years. We have been using that quite a bit. I'm hoping that next year we don't need that much, but over time, we were using a lot of subs. So that was one area. I do want to point out under the high school 8900 7301 equipment, which is towards the bottom of page 32. Jeff already talked about the need for new coral risers, and there's no question on anybody's mind about that one. We definitely need those. They're very antique and could possibly dangerous. But another item that is being added is a pug mill for extracting clay, so it can be reused. So it's kind of a reduce, reuse kind of concept to get that piece of machinery. That is, the art department is requesting that, so I just wanted to point out, to me, it sounds like a neat idea. I don't exactly know what it is. Yes?
I actually was interested in the 8,900 to 3,400.
Yes.
That just looks like it was just a.
It was just a budgeting error
Okay.
from year to year.
Okay.
I keep changing account numbers on Jeff, and our communication doesn't always work. And it's nothing against either one of us. It's just, some people just we don't always listen clearly to each other. So this is just trying to clarify things from previous years. And when it comes to the Achievement Center, salaries for that, in the past, we used to charge a portion of teacher salaries to that account, but after talking with Jeff, it's very fluid on which teacher is helping out the Achievement Center, and it's very hard to budget accurately for that in the Achievement Center department code. So it's a minimal amount of money, it's not required by the Department of Ed, why even break it out? So that's why, the only thing that's broken out under the Achievement Center is the actual ed tech coordinator who's kind of running that and is there all the time.
So to be clear, this is not actually a budgetary change. This is a budget allocation that we used to make,
Yep.
we're no longer making, so it's just a reallocation. It's not changing
Right.
any expense anywhere.
Right, and a lot of what you'll see in the budget is not budget decreases or increases, just kind of moving money around to accurately portray where we're actually spending the money or requirements from the Department of Ed. So that's what some of those changes are for. Page 33. Already talked about the online subscriptions accounts. Most of these are pretty straightforward, actually duplications because of one of them is the nurse ed tech being added here. And changes in special ed because of students. And I can't spell under $9,034.50 for legal services for the superintendent. We did increase it because of actual expenditures, and I can't spell actual. Accutal. So that's one thing. I do want to note at the bottom of page 33, you'll see a decrease in the salaries for custodians under the high school. 9003-1180 is salaries for the high school, and that reflects the town reimbursement. The last couple of years, the town reimbursement was included in revenues, but that affected the amount that we reported to the state. So we were overinflating how much we actually spent on custodians because we were counting that money as revenue. So I talked to town manager this year and said, hey, can I use it to reduce our expenditures? Because then it will be more accurately reported to the DOE, but there's no change in how much they still have to pay us. It's a more accurate portrayal of what we're spending. So that's why you'll see that those two lines have been reduced quite dramatically. So that's a change from previous years. Any other questions from page 33?
Oh, I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
I can see you kind of.
I feel silly asking this, but, so does that mean with the custodians, does this reflect that new custodian that we got last year?
Oh, I'm sorry, I
from-
shouldn't jump.
That went to the pool, but we thought it was in our budget. This does not reflect that. or doesn't?
The person is budgeted here, but the money from the town is helping reduce that portion, so it is reflected in there.
So,
It's,
if I can, I think I can help clarify. The reduction we're seeing here does not have to do with that. It has to do with, actually, go back a little ways. We used to just record net costs with the town.
yes,
Then we went to be more accurate because there are contracts to record the gross costs and then the revenue received.
right.
However, that caused an issue with how we reported to the state because it looked like we're getting more money than we're actually getting. So we're moving back to sort of show this as a net cost for those things that we're showing so that the reporting to the state is more helpful. So while we're still technically the entity that has those employees and contracts, we're reporting them only, again, on a net basis because of how we report out to the state. And so that's how it's reflected in our budget, which rolls up to our state reporting. It doesn't reflect the additional custodian and pool and other issues.
So, I understand that that's not reflected there, but I guess I would like to throw out to the universe that in here somewhere, we're still paying for a custodian. We may be getting probably 20% reimbursement for, and we're getting 0 to 20% of the work done in the schools. Probably 80% or more is actually going to the pool, but we're paying. So I'm still very uncomfortable with that, and I don't know how that gets sorted out.
I,
Just-
that's a good
And I don't know
question.
if that's where you were going?
I was, yes, I was asking if this reflects that, and you're saying no.
I
It
don't
doesn't
think
seem
so.
like it,
In
which is
fact,
what you're saying it doesn't as well, correct?
Correct. That person is budgeted there, but the amount from the town doesn't equate to how much work they actually do for the town.
Right, so we're,
So,
Yeah.
in fact, we may wish to revisit that for this year as well, relative to what the reimbursement should have been to reflect what actually happened. So both for this year and for the budget, we ought to have that discussion to resolve that with the town.
Yep. That's where to go, is to talk to the town council
which we
about
have
that.
meetings set up, so.
Yep.
So potentially, this percentage could change if we have a
Potentially.
conversation with the town
Yep.
and they are willing to reimburse us more for that custodian that's doing.
Potentially.
Maybe not for this year.
Well, I'm wondering, John, are you suggesting that they should pay some extra for
But that's
this current
how
school
it
year?
works.
What I'm suggesting is if the reimbursement rates for this year are identical to the prior year, if they are receiving more services from a larger custodial staff, then the rate should have been changed to reflect that, and not sure that it has.
Right.
And it would be changed to reflect that for this current year and for the following budget year. These adjustments, recording them on a net basis, do not reflect that.
Right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well,
So-
it would be really helpful, I think, to get from Perry, as much as he can break it down, a breakdown of the the hours spent on school and town-related buildings, and sort of the breakdown of costs, so we can sort of show, this is what we've paid, and yet it's not covering all our ground.
I'm actually going to suggest that we may want to think about putting together something that looks like, this is the scope of the shared town and school employees, this is the portion we are paying, and this is the portion the town is paying, and look at that for at least the last, not just a single year, but if we can do it at least what we're budgeting and what we had last year, so we can actually see, because there have been some changes.
There have, and I'm looking, you got that perplexed look, because on their side, there are also positions that they do for the school that we don't reimburse them for, so it's one big puzzle that needs to be looked at.
As I said, we recognize that's true, and if that is true, we need to be aware of it, because it's something that, if it stops, we have an issue, and we don't control that. So, whatever the scope of it is, what I'm saying is, because it is confusing, and because it's complicated, and because it doesn't seem to have been routinely revisited and updated, we ought to have a track of the joint group and what those allocations look like. Because if the work is changing, the allocation should be changing, and that doesn't seem to have happened.
I can tell you that from year to year, we do increase the amount that is billed to the town for custodial services and technology services and HR, just based on kind of cost of living increase, but that's.
Right, that's an overall total cost increase piece?
Yeah.
It doesn't reflect
Any changes.
any
in-
change in work duties, which is
Right.
what we're talking about.
Yes.
Because those have also appear to have shifted. And I don't know which directions they have shifted.
Mhm.
But that's something that we, I feel like we need to be a little more careful tracking what those are and how they may shift.
Mhm.
It's not part of what we currently report.
I have a question. So on these two items for the custodians, where it's -22 and -35%,
Mhm.
so are we talking about adjusting those numbers upward to reflect more accurately what we believe is the proper allocation, school versus town? Is that what we're saying?
By upward, you mean like
Meaning-
a higher negative number?
Yes, like we get more reimbursement. And so then my question is, how did we arrive at these numbers?
Heavy sigh. Because when I first started here, I took the amount that was given to me from previous years and just added the basic increase because there was, it was very hard to figure out where that amount was coming from. And so at that time, I wasn't sure the process, so I just continued to carry on what was going on and adding basically a cost of living increase. And that's basically what I did this year too. Because this is something that has to be worked with the town. So this is for future years. We did talk to the town manager, and if there are joint positions that we'd like to add to the budget, we are discussing about meeting with him beforehand and letting him know this is our thoughts, because if I'd like to add somebody to the business office, that's another shared department, or even technology shared department. So we were saying that really the process should be, we should be talking to the superintendent and the town manager prior to you seeing the budget, so that everybody's aware of what's coming down the pike. And it was never done that before. It was not ideal. So I'm hoping that we can change it so it's a little more transparent and a little bit more ideal.
So, can we get a list of the shared ones and what the current allocation is? Because I think we ought to sit down and have that discussion with Matt soon, like right away, to just sort of say, because honestly, I don't know which direction it will go. It's like, is this accurate? Is this a fair reflection of this? What is the basis, or what should be the basis? And, because we don't know where we stand. It's a little bit uncertain.
And also, because last year, the whole reason for pushing for extra custodians was because we weren't getting the job completely done. So we want to know that we're also we have enough support.
I think that particular problem, that particular issue, has illuminated a larger issue, which is we don't know
Exactly.
what the shared basis is.
Right.
And so it makes it very difficult to budget in those circumstances.
I will try to pull something together. I do know technology counts their tech tickets, and if I remember correctly, it's like 20 or 30% is the towns and the rest of the schools, so we're trying to calculate the amount that way. My department, the town didn't start paying for the business office until 2 years ago when we added the HR position. So that, and then custodians, it's, as I said, I'm not quite sure where the basis of the reimbursement cost came from, but I do know also in Public Works, they have calculated how much their grounds cost that they do for the town, for the school department. So I'll see what I can pull together. It's a little, because this is.
So what I would suggest is,
Mhm.
rather than spending too much time on the
Mhm.
detail, is let's get a list of everybody, and let's get a list of what Matt thinks is in his budget. Because he knows his budget pretty well, and and if it's not in his budget, then it's probably in ours.
I don't want to add to the length of this discussion because I think we've run it through, but I would be curious, since it's been brought up multiple times that the town, you know, plows and mows and whatnot, town-owned buildings without charging us. And I think that's typical, and I would love to know how, if in neighboring towns, the schools are charged for the town taking care of town properties, because these schools are town properties. And so to say that they do this stuff and don't charge us, I'm saying it out loud for the first time, irks me. I would love to know if the Parks Department in South Portland charges the school department to mow the grass outside of South Portland High School. My guess is no. So I think that that's a pretty, my guess is that it's a common arrangement in cities and towns that the people that do the mowing for town properties mow all town properties. Just wanna throw that out there and see what is typical in surrounding towns and cities.
Okay. Try to make a note of that.
May I just say, something? I mean, this may be something that we could, again, come back to at whenever we do have these joint meetings with the town council. I think that it's an overdue conversation. And I hope that if we're gonna ask the town what they're paying for all of these employees that are quote shared, that we also show the total cost and then show the difference between what they're paying and what we're paying. I mean, we really need to look at that in terms of, is that really equitable? Right, okay.
Okay. So moving on to page 34, there has been a movement of funds between all of the repairs and maintenance accounts in facilities. And that's because the Department of Ed wants us to show how much we actually spend to repair Pond Cove in the middle school versus how much we actually spend to repair the high school. In previous years, it was all dumped into the facilities and management account, the overall district-wide, so we're moving funds. There was no increase to the budget, or very minimal. So that's why you'll see movement between certain accounts and stuff. Another item I'd like to point out is under student transportation on page 34, the 90-20-7301 equipment line. There is an increase of $6,200. We want to purchase 3 camera systems for buses that currently don't have them. Not all of our buses have cameras, and we actually could use more than just those 3, but it was a big hit to the budget, so Perry felt that we'll try to try to do it a little bit every year. I just wanted to point that out. And some of the special ed district-wide increases are because we are moving money from our special ed grant, because that grant is only supposed to use to help support us, not to take over paying for some of our positions. And some of these positions had been in that grant for years, and they are cracking down on what you can do. So that's what a lot of the increases you'll see under special education district-wide.
Question for the cameras.
Mhm.
Do you know how many buses have cameras on, and obtaining this, what percentage of buses will have cameras? So it's like,
I think about half of our buses have cameras.
Okay. All right.
And so this will add, I think the original request was for 9 camera systems, and so we cut it by a third. So we'll still have probably about a third of the buses without
Okay.
cameras. I mean, that's very rounding figures. Any other questions on page 34? Okay, so page 35, as I said, I talked about the movement from the grants to our regular budget. The 9041 8100 dues and fees amount will only be an increase of 4,100. there was a miscommunication, I think it was a timing error. I pulled the information off the budget from the athletic director, and then he updated it, and it was just a timing error. So I can say that we'll drop that a little bit. And most of the other items have already, are pretty self-explanatory, or have already been explained, I believe. Any questions on page 35?
And I just have a little bit of a concern that the supplies have been cut to almost nothing. It just, what were we spending it on, and what's gonna happen? I know that may be a question for our special ed director, but that's such, I mean, it sort of says it's, you know, to make offset for other expenditures, I understand that, but, you know, it was there for a reason previously.
Well, actually, most supplies normally come out of the grant,
Okay.
and that is something that,
So they did come out.
so we'd added into this year's budget, and then after going through most of the year, we're finding out that we don't need it in this year's budget, that we can continue to use the grant funds to help buy special ed supplies.
So this is an example where some things are coming out of the grant, but supplies are now will be being purchased by the grant.
Yep.
And the grant
Bless you.
grant spending shows up in a different part of the budget with the federal funding piece, is that correct?
Yes, it's at the very end.
Yes, okay.
I have a question about the coordinator reducing to 3 days. Was this based on the demand, or are we trying to reduce money for the budget?
I don't want to speak for him, but I know that next year's budget, there's going to be a bump because he's going to have 1.5 system integrators, because he's trying to move a new person. His current system integrator is retiring, and we are currently training the current administrator to the superintendent to take his place. So next year, she'll be working full-time as a system integrator, and he'll be working part-time. And also the coordinator, administrator for technology has some personal reasons to want to cut down his schedule for next year.
Okay,
So
it's
that's
personal
why that
reasons.
whole thing came about.
We have to fill Andrea's position,
Hmm?
and we're gonna have to hire someone to fill Andrea's position?
Yep. So page 36 is all about technology. And the changes are, I think, pretty straightforward, unless you guys have some questions on those.
Internet connection.
Mhm.
Every time we need a faster internet connection, we always go up. So here we're actually saving money, not projecting anything in that's going up, thinking about upgrading our.
We are
Speed?
looking at, well, we're looking to upgrading the wiring of the system, but one reason why this went down is because, I mean, it says there that Network Maine is applying for E-rate. E-rate is basically a federal reimbursement, and so what, the Network Maine is who the school department gets its internet from, and they're reducing their fees because they're going to be getting money directly from E-rate to help offset that. So that was one reason why they went down. And also, Spectrum, which is the other internet company, they have reduced their rates. So between those two, we were able to cut down. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. That went faster. There we go.
Is there anything in the appropriations report that wouldn't jump out into these highlights that you feel like you want to draw our attention to?
Well, there is the one item that, when it comes to the fund balance, we're only using 400,000 compared to 800,000 that we used for this year. But other than that, most of the revenues have pretty much stayed flat. There isn't any really new and interesting items.
Where does that take her on the fund balance to?
Excuse me?
What does it take our unassigned fund balance to?
Our unassigned fund balance is page 45 of this report. And if we use 400,000 for this budget, I do anticipate our fund balance to be at 249,000. We do get approximately 200,000 added back into the fund balance every year after the audit. But we definitely couldn't do the 800,000 like we did this year.
So the 249 anticipated is not in addition to the 200,000 we get back after the audit?
Correct. It's not.
So it would be more like 400,000, hopefully.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. When I did the calculation, it says, and for the 17-18 year, it says anticipated. If you notice, the unassigned fund balance from the previous year is 449. I did add the 200,000 to there, so
Okay.
sorry.
All right.
On this
Sorry.
side, but on the, I think Susanna's talking about the right side, not the left side.
So you've got the anticipated 249 after we draw 400,000 from it. When does the additional 200,000 come in? At the end of
At the end of the
2018?
fiscal year.
Okay.
So at the end of, you see, above that, 16-17, we have 449,000. At the end of, and that amount for 16-17 is accurate, because our actual audited balance was $1.2 million, and we used 800,000. But what happens at the end of 17-18 is that when they do the audit, we don't spend all of what we budget for or what we appropriate. So there's always some money that goes back into the fund balance, and we do get some unanticipated revenue. So there is some of that money that goes back in, but I did include that in the 600,000 anticipated at the beginning of the 17-18.
How much variance is there in that year-end number?
It can vary between 500,000 to 100,000 from year to year, depending on how much we have left at the end of the year and how much we want to use to help.
As we sit here in March, what's your sort of confidence band on the 200,000 number?
I think 200,000 is pretty doable. Actually, maybe closer to 100,000 because we did have some unexpected expenditures this year. But 200,000 is pretty solid. We won't have more than that, though. I can almost guarantee that. But
That's what I was going to ask, what the confidence
Right.
band is.
So was my question, what, like, is there kind of an estimated way to figure out, you know, if we draw off 400 to, you know, help the budget, there's 249 left, that, you know, after, at the, you know, once we close the books and do the audit, has a likelihood of going up to 449? Yes or no?
I'd have to say no on that one in this particular year. Right now, I did do an analysis of where we're standing in our financials, and we're right on track. We're fine, but we don't have a lot of cushion. So that's why I'm saying we need to keep within that 200. It's not set in stone.
So for me, I think like the big question is, can we afford to draw any more towards this year's
Yeah,
budget?
that's a good question. And I think we could afford to draw just 100,000 more.
That much, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we can do that.
Howard?
But I think it's a question also worth asking your auditor, what they would recommend as a percent of budget. I mean, I think that it would be worth getting there. I mean, we're not gonna have a hard and fast number, but to say roughly speaking, I think that it's, for a school district, it's prudent to have X% in this account. It'd be nice to know that before you drew down and didn't realize that. I mean, you know, I remember 2 years ago, we were being told that the auditors felt as if perhaps we, or at least from town administrator felt perhaps that we could, we should feel a bit more willingness to spend some of that down.
Mhm.
Well, we've done that.
Mhm.
And I hate to have us just get too far in another direction.
Right. I remember in other audit years, them recommending 2 to 3%.
Right.
Well, the DOE recommends that you don't have any more than 3%. They're fine with you having less than 3%, but if you start having more than 3%, they're going, why aren't you using this to help reduce taxes? So, that's where I think part of the 3% comes around.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can I just say one thing? So just kind of a shift here. If you go to page 37, which is the priority items not included in the initial budget. Remember our last meeting when Perry Schwartz was speaking to you, and he said, for now, I want to strike this position.
Yep.
It was down here as maintenance
Yep.
mechanic. Well, it may have been yesterday, it feels like 2 weeks ago. Sometime recently, Perry met with Catherine and with Matt Sturgis, the town administrator, and me, to articulate his personal, I guess I'll use the word frustration, with the amount of projects that he oversees, and how in any one day, any one of them can take him away from all of the rest of the work that he's responsible for. And it was at least 2 pages of examples, it may have been 3, but I know that the first page, they were just all town projects, not school projects. And he was wondering, what do I do with this? Because I want to be able to keep my eye on a number of things. I want to feel as if I can get my hands around it. I want to feel as if this job's doable. And I want people that work here to feel that I'm attentive to them and their needs. And so at the end of that meeting, the feeling was that maybe rather than asking for a maintenance mechanic, that he would recommend reclassifying this to something like called a project manager. And the project manager would work for both the town, I mean, it could be split, by the way, but for now, the one-town concept, there could be somebody who is overseeing projects, maybe even writing up bid specs, clerking the job, and if time permits, maybe being able to be working with the team, but more of a overseer.
First level projects are
Mhm.
what Perry does.
Right.
He's got,
Right, so just know that he would like that
Oh.
still in the budget under this, again, these are all items not in the budget right now, but he feels that would really help all around. So he asked tonight that we relay that to you, and that's what we're doing.
So the number's the same, it's just a different title?
I don't know if the number's the
Okay.
same.
is that the sort of person also who will be making sure that the proper amounts follow through to the proper projects and some of the other ways that we've had difficulty in tracking these many multiple projects?
Right, yeah, I think the answer is yes.
Was there support from the town side for this position?
Well, I think that Matt Sturgis wanted to talk about it. Actually, tonight, ironically, Perry is at the town meeting, but this is their first budget night. So he's talking to them. I think this was gonna come up. I don't know on what level of detail, but again, I think I heard Mr. Sturgis talking about an 80-20 split. And I'm thinking about my visual of 2 pages, and 1 page was town projects, and 1 page is school projects. That feels like 50-50 to me, not 80-20. So I don't know about that, and I also don't know if 69.2 is the actual salary for a job of this responsibility.
That's the salary if it was just a regular maintenance mechanic.
Yeah, I would think.
There may be somebody on staff who could roll into this project manager position, and then while we would need to hire as a maintenance mechanic, because the person on staff is at a higher wage, so we'll have to, and also we don't know how much the town is willing to pay, because this is definitely a shared position, so we don't want to go through what we went through last year. So we'll have to see how it rolls out.
So, will this mean that a maintenance person is still required, if not in this year budget, next year?
Well, right now, there are 2 custodians that that Perry is requesting that are not in the budget right now. He feels absolutely short 2 custodians. He also feels he needs ideally another person. I mean, I guess what he called it here was a maintenance, I think he meant a maintenance person. So if, so this would be a working foreman, so to speak, and you don't get the full-time maintenance person, but you get somebody to help when he can or she can, and also kind of supervise these projects that are all right now facing Perry. But again, none of that is in the budget.
Well, my recollection is what Perry had said was, when he presented this, is that he was reconsidering having it even included in this list, because he was thinking of a new way to sort of reorganize staff, and that was why he was withdrawing. And this is sort of the part 2 to that. The part 2 to that is how I'd like to reorganize my staff to more efficiently accomplish the work that's in front of us, is not to add the maintenance worker, but to add this person, to allow the whole staff to be more effective. So I think that's.
Is it possible to get a person with custodian skills as well as maintenance skills?
Well, I think there are people who are able to do both. I don't,
Okay.
but you need to be paid appropriately. Those 2 jobs don't pay the same. So if you're doing 4 hours
Correct.
of one and 4 hours the other, you would be sure that you want to pay them with a job responsibility that they
Yeah.
have. But it's possible somebody
If we
could
could have a
do.
nurse whose librarian has a nurse exposure experience, and we pay the differences, we can do the same thing over here as well then. Because I think a maintenance person is probably required, if not this year, maybe next year. So my point is, either the project manager has to have those skills, which I doubt it, or since they're asking for 2 custodians, hire 1 custodian who has both skills. It's a recommendation.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we need to hear from Perry a little bit.
Yeah.
My impression was that his staff right now does more than just their maintenances. They all have a little bit of this job management piece, and that's part of why, when you've got stacks and stacks of projects to keep track of, you're doing more than just your job, or what's in front of you. So, we'd have to hear back from him in terms of what the actual volume of specific maintenance work is.
Yeah.
And how much of that's being handled by maintenance staff currently. as opposed to
Let's also
additional
remember, this
things.
is not currently in the budget.
Yeah,
Right.
Yep,
it's not
I
in the
know.
budget.
Right. Okay.
Sadly.
I think that piggybacks nicely to a comment that is, obviously not the will of the board, but my opinion, which is, if there are priority items not included in the budget, that principals or department heads or even the school board feel are urgent, I believe, and I believe strongly, that those costs will need to be offset and not added on. We are already at a 10.8% tax impact. And if there are items that are desirable, but not necessary, I suggest that we don't discuss them any further, because it's not a good use of our time. Likewise, if there are budget items that are included, that are desirable, that are great, but they are not necessary and urgent, I would love for people, not us, to consider those as possible reduction or offset possibilities. And that's my opinion.
Well, may I speak to that?
Yes, please. Thank you.
I'm assuming, though, it may not be a date that is hard and fast, but I know that the 10th of April is on your schedule for the time to adopt a budget, and then a week or 2 later, I think it's 2 weeks later, you actually meet with and present your budget to town council. So if, for now, let's just imagine that April 10th really is a hard and fast date. There are only 3 weeks left for me to have the opportunity to really sit down with all of comfortable, I need to sit down and talk with and decide what is in the budget and what's not in the budget. I mean, we haven't gotten to that point yet. So I just really would love to know tonight before we leave, if there isn't a direction, that's fine, but if there is one, the sooner I know what that is, so that I've got a target to try and hit, and present that to you in a thoughtful way, that would be appreciated.
I personally want to know how much would we have to cut to bring the budget to a 5.5% tax increase? And that could include moving more from undesignated funds. It could,
Right.
however it has to happen. And that's not that's not the board, I'm curious. What would that look like?
How'd you get 5%? I mean, why 5%?
It's about half of the current tax impact.
So just.
It's a ballpark, it's a starting point. Just not what would go, but what is the amount of money that would have to come out? We're at 10.8, I picked 5.5.
So, a couple of things that we'll sort of figure out, we're gonna try and come to a consensus on how we wanna go forward here, but a couple of things I would wanna get out on the table. I mean, I think we're in a really challenging budget situation. You know, from looking at the recently released sort of first draft of the town budget, their personnel costs go up 4.7%, and their headcount actually goes up a bit. Now, our personnel costs at our current draft budget go up about 4.4%. And our headcounts are flat. And so it doesn't mean we don't need to sharpen our pencils, but that's the environment that we're in. We don't have $1 million of undesignated funds to draw down, we have a small number. And so, I do think that we should return to some of those items not in the budget, because I know there are people at the board level who felt particularly strongly about some of those. And the question really comes down to, do we as a board think we ought to include this in the starting pie before we go back and cut? Now, it may come back out, depending on how it all sorts out, but I think the first step is to sort of see what's in there, and then we can sort of say, oh, well, where do we think we need to get to? What do we think is possible? But I think we sort of have to actually go through and because I know there were some strong opinions about some things that were on that list that really should be in that total. And I think we also, and a sort of separate item for discussion is, how do we want to handle the engineering study? Because if we don't do it now, an entire year will pass. So those are so I'll throw out there are two in particular that I thought we should discuss explicitly whether they should be included back in the budget. One of them is the social worker at the middle school, which I think would have a huge impact on learning, and the other one is a resource officer for the schools. Whether those are two. If there's other ones that people wanted to specifically sort of take the temperature of the board on as to whether to really include or not, I'd be interested to do that. But then I think after that, then we can go and say, so where do we think we can come out? What can we do? What does the numbers look like? But rather than, before Howard sits down with everybody, he's got to know what our opinion is on what's in and what's out.
Well, I would just, in terms of what I would like to see included in a perfect world, I would agree with the social worker, the SRO. I want this, I want it all, but I want the study in there, and also the language, the Spanish one and French one.
Okay.
Where is that on here?
Here it is, right here by Cecil,
Yeah.
right by the ring,
Right
right
in the
here.
middle.
Right by
Right
the
by
ring.
the ring. Okay, thank you.
So when we're talking about necessities, I agree with John around the school resource officer. Social worker, could we get creative? Half a time could be better than nothing. I mean, I believe that's pretty close to a necessity. Does it warrant a full-time? I don't know. I think that in a perfect world, it probably warrants 2 more social workers. We're certainly not in a perfect world. So I think it's a priority, but does it warrant a whole position? I don't know. And I think the architect and engineer fees, perhaps not at that level. Perhaps we need to have a discussion around prioritizing projects that are both urgent and important. And then, and knowing what that means, it means that other things get really shut back, and that, prioritizing those reduces the scope of the study and reduces the fees. So that's a conversation I'd like to have, but I think that has to get in there, or we're not gonna get it done.
When Rebecca was here, did she mention that there's potentially resources available for the officers, or is that a grant base, or there's some funds from the state, or there's a long wait? Let's not hope on it.
I think it's the latter.
Okay. So, yeah, and I agree with Elizabeth in reference to the study, particularly for the Pond Cove cafeteria and auditorium. Of all the projects, that's the most important one for the school. And then I think you agree with that. Study fees should be reduced if we concentrate on that one, middle school and Pond Cove.
And bringing those main offices out
Yes.
to the front.
Yeah,
For
and security, yeah.
We'll get there.
Heather, may I ask a question of Howard? The architecture and engineer fees, when it says a study, more in depth than the Harriman, are they talking about these few projects that we've identified, or are they talking about a complete study of the schools?
The latter.
Okay.
That's why in their budget, when they said that they think the cost of this project could be a certain number of millions of dollars, that in that projection were several $1 million, at least $2 million, that were there just as a placeholder for things that they can't even imagine until they actually get in here and start really looking carefully at the entire building and interview teachers in all 3 schools and bring in specialists to look at, everything from mortar joints to plumbing, electrical, okay.
Just as an example, if we're focusing on the projects that have been identified, the cafetorium and the entryway and the few others, but thinking about the Pond Cove and middle school area, those are the basic things in Pond Cove and middle school. Do we need, so yes, I know the answer is yes, but could we potentially say, look, don't even go to the 6th grade wing and do a study of there, because it's not, I know it's all connected, but it's separate. Like, can we narrow the focus and say, I know that building's old, I know that needs the work, but say, in reference to what Elizabeth was saying, to just focus on the areas that we have identified as our major concerns and not broaden it.
So may I answer that? So I think the answer is yes. I mean, if I knew what really is on your so-called short list, like I don't know where you stand, for example, I think I do regarding the wiring, remember all that? And then there's the weight room at the high school. But if I could know, these are things we really want to concentrate on and not go any further right now, then we could talk to the architects and engineers and say, what would that do if we just said, it's a smaller project, and these are the items that we want to do, which now 760, what would it look like?
Right.
And so, we could do that between now and the 10th, if we just knew what you wanted and what you would leave out.
Yeah,
Just
but
just appreciate that there are some things that, if they did have the opportunity to really look in depth, that they might find that you really would want to also add, you just say, you know what, we accept that, but we aren't going there right now. I mean, that's,
I don't doubt that.
right.
I don't. And I want to add the
I'm
wiring.
kind of scared.
I need to add the spaghetti closet to my list.
Right.
But that's not this list, it's this list anyway, so.
Right.
Different lists, I'm
I
getting
think you're gonna
confused.
pay any hope over here.
Oh, just to comment, so I would agree with Elizabeth that To the extent we're looking at this list now and saying, are there items here that we're gonna focus on and move forward with, that it sort of feels like that would then need to come from somewhere else, because I don't feel like we're in a climate where we have the luxury to add, just add. And if we did, we'd have to have really strong justifications for those items. And then when it comes to the list specifically, my opinion, since we're all kind of chiming in here, I think the school resource officer is something everyone's in agreement on, and I think there's support in the town for part of that. My understanding is there's a fair amount of that can be picked up. You know, we can share that, so it might not be as big of an item as it looks like. I agree with itemizing the architect and engineering fees. I mean, maybe we can't do it all now, but it'd be great to do the priority items. And on the social worker, it sounds like there's a strong support for this, but I haven't been involved in the conversations that led up to that consensus.
Yes.
And I'd love to have
Okay.
some, understanding of why that is a critical item. I'd like to see whatever it is that we're adding, is it going to be addressing sort of a pain point?
Right.
Something that's really
I could have
a
Troy
critical-
speak to that at your next meeting.
Okay,
We did a little bit, but just because the current one is completely booked by
Yep.
special ed, so that's a very small population using up one in my so
Mhm.
Troy will come back and do
That's true.
better. but
Right.
We have
Okay.
like the rest of the entire middle school with no
Okay.
social worker.
yeah, that's what I understand. It sounds like you all sort of heard this and just from on the ground experience, so I'd like to be able to be up to speed with that and share it with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and
Community.
my own personal experience,
Mm-hmm.
it appears to be significantly impacting learning at the middle
Mhm.
school, not
Okay,
having
then
that.
let's just elaborate
Yeah,
on that
but
so
I
we know.
would rather have Troy address that, because
Mhm.
that's,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
So, in my mind, when I have my list of things that I would love to have included, in my mind, the architectural fee it stands alone. I think in part because we first were thinking it could stand alone. But now that it can't, I'm curious, before we just debate the whole list, and I had asked Catherine this earlier, so I think you probably have the figure. If we added the architectural fee as is, what would the increase be to the taxpayer, if you have that at your fingertips?
I do. And if I remember correctly, it is 3.1% increase, if you add the 760,000.
So it would be 10.8 plus.
Oh, I was looking at the budget to budget amount. The actual
To
tax
taxpayers.
increase to the taxpayers would actually be 3.6 additional. So it's 14.2% would be the cost to the taxpayer if you added the 760,000.
Total 14.2.
Yeah, the total increase is 14.2%.
Okay, thank you. So my feeling about the architectural thing is, I'm sure there's a way to reduce that if we say, don't go looking for trouble. Let's just focus on the projects that they highlighted in their presentation. I really feel strongly that there's, in addition to the middle school Pond Cove changes that we've addressed, I think what they were talking about at the high school is almost equally important, because in my mind, you have to spend money to make money in this town. And this is where we've talked about this before, bringing realtors in to, elaborate on the fact that we're not shining physically anymore, our town. And the last thing we need is for a family moving to Maine to not choose Cape, to choose Yarmouth over Cape, just because it's not as physically, attractive. So in my mind, I think it's good money spent. I do, for several reasons. That's my opinion.
Can I remind ourselves that the architecture fees was also gonna prepare us to get a bond as well? So if we dissect the project in smaller projects, we may not be able to do that either. And so you cannot be asking for a bond in partitioning and asking in stages. So that's something to contemplate and think about it. And if we do have a change, and I think the two lunches, recess, money-wise, it's less money, but it's necessary. And also the part-time ed tech is less money out of the whole column. And it's more or less moving one person to a full-time and the another person to half-time. And it's been articulated pretty well in that write-up. So if we do, I will advocate for these two positions just because the budget is low in these two, overall of these, and we get more bang for the buck as well.
Which two positions you're talking about, the
The
lunch,
two
lunch?
yeah, recess, lunch.
Lunch aid and something else, or just those two?
Part-time ed
Ed
tech,
tech.
third.
Okay,
The one below it for the high school.
okay.
So, can I suggest a sort of potential process that we're gonna, so when we're looking at this list, what I'm sort of suggesting is that this is the list that we're gonna have discussions to say, we'd like to raise these up to the same level as what's in the budget. And then figure out where we think we need to cut to, and say, and some of them may come back out, but basically, we wanna put them on the same footing as whatever's in the book budget currently, or whatever's in the, any other line item, we're saying, this is the pie to start with, that we stand behind in terms of its effect on learning.
If we were just to pretend for a moment that the engineer fees could be reduced to 500,000, let's just pretend. And we were to add in the school resource officer, 80,000, and then, and the social worker. I mean, my point is, it doesn't take long to get back up to $600,000 or $700,000. So if you all feel, and I don't know if you do feel this way, but if you feel that the voters would struggle with a 10% tax increase, then that means I need to figure out a way to shave $600,000 or $700,000 from the earlier budget. That's kind of the status quo, so-called, and I can, and if need be, that will definitely get done. But it will be, I don't know how far I can go with that without getting into personnel. You just need to understand that. And I mean, the thing that could happen, which could be a mistake, would be that we take another sizable reduction out of the capital improvement account, the CIP. Last 2 years ago, that was $1 million. We cut that to 500,000. We could cut it again by half and be down to 250,000. And that doesn't, and that way you aren't losing personnel. But the problem with that is, that's a real bad practice. I mean, you've got to maintain your facilities and grounds. So I just wanted to point that out, that I hope that before you all leave tonight, that you have a conversation about what you can support, at least for now, in terms of a overall tax increase, so that we can begin to have conversations that work us in that, move us in that direction.
Right.
I don't wanna be in the position at a business meeting voting against our budget. Because I don't believe it'll fly with town council, and I don't believe it'll fly with the voters. We've got to be realistic. And there are we need to do a lot of work around how do we raise more funds and how do we, whatever, but we've got to be realistic, and I'm coming in and being that person tonight. I have to be.
Hope. I just wanted to say one thing, to reply to Howard's comment about if we have this number, if you wanted to go back, if we wanted you to go back and find 600,000 out of the budget, I think to say that these architecture and engineering fees would come out of our already fairly conservative education budget would be absurd. Like, I think that's, I would hate to see that number. I don't want that number to impact what we're doing in the schools, because I view it as just fundamentally different. I'd hate to see us say, well, we needed to renovate the schools, so we cut through staff people. It just doesn't make sense. So I don't know how everyone else feels, but I really wanted to make, that's very important to me, that that number does not come out of our operating, operating and staff, right?
I agree, I agree. Are there-
Is it a fair ask, Howard, to see what you can shave off the proposed budget without including personnel? Cause
I haven't gone through that exercise. I can, I have no problem doing it. I mean, I guess I wouldn't want to assume that hands off on personnel, because it could be that we could make some adjustments and trade in some cases. And it may be that we have people that are retiring that we don't necessarily, if everything else is important, that we may not replace everybody who's retiring, and that could be called personnel. So
Okay.
I like to have some latitude where, if it made sense, that we could trade off either personnel from one to another, or if it's possible, and I'm not saying it is, that we could absorb some
Yeah.
positions based on retirements where no one loses a job, and we simply absorb that. It may be that we could do that.
Okay, so it may be a fair ask to see if you can create a reduction without people losing their jobs.
Yeah,
Is that a fair ask
yeah,
and guideline?
yeah. If I knew what was on your short list, I'm not sure, it's clear to me yet.
Right.
But if I knew what was on your short list, and I had a general target of where you wanted to be with a tax increase, I could come back with,
Yeah.
here's the way to get there.
So here's my take. I think Hope articulated it very well. I was a part of Buildings and Grounds at the beginning of this whole study and the architect, and I believe in redoing these buildings, but what good is a building if you don't have the education and the students and the teachers and
Right.
the classes and the programs? So I don't want it to be at the cost of somebody's job.
Right.
And that personnel piece. I do think that it's an incredibly, I know we say that it's not gonna get easier. I know we say that it's another year off if we hold off, but this seems like an exceptionally challenging year to put in
Yep.
a $760,000 facility study.
Yep.
So I am not as supportive of that as much as I am of a school resource officer.
Okay.
And I am very pulled towards a social worker as well.
Okay.
I think that's very vital for the well-being, not, yes, the learning, but also the overall well-being of these middle school kids who
Yep.
need the support.
Yep.
So that's where I stand.
Thank you.
And I agree with Elizabeth, like, we want it all. We definitely do. But there's no way we can go in with a 14.2% tax increase, like, we'll just be laughed at, so, or 10, so,
Well,
I feel like 5 might be a little bit low, cause I feel like this year may be the year that we have to go in big and say, look, we know we're in trouble, and so we know we're going in big, and maybe not quite 10.8, but that's where I
Okay.
So-
stand.
That's helpful.
So I also feel like, in some respects, when you look at the state funding, and sort of where are we gonna be next year, what's gonna happen? So you sort of look forward at sort of what's gonna happen to our student population, what's gonna happen to our buildings, what's gonna happen to our staff, and what's gonna happen to our state funding. I don't think next year will be quite as severe as this year, because there's just less funding to cut. We're already down to about 9% of our budget, or something really small. And so, and the ability of that state funding to vary it so widely is starting to get to a de minimis portion. So, while we may look at some things and pushing them off, we're in this reason of looking at things like this bond issue, because we've pushed stuff off forever, and that doesn't make me happy, but this is the year we find ourselves in. So, I'm looking at it right now and thinking to myself, I definitely would like to see additional social worker added into the middle school on the same basis as what's in the budget. Look at adding the resource officer on the same basis as in the budget. Look at adjusting the unassigned funds as low as we can. It sounds like, about another 100K there. And that actually puts us a little bit below. With resource officer, no, we're about, not quite, where we stand with the budget now. And then we should have a discussion about what we think we can support, because, in some respects, the town council and the citizens, they're not our enemies. They're our friends in trying to get this done, and we have a difficult year. And, it's very clear that our state government and Augusta and however it's organized do not support what we're doing here. So we have to decide whether we do, and at what level, because you can't say we won't support it and not expect changes, because there will be impacts. We already see the impacts in what we've put off till later in terms of our maintenance and our buildings. And insofar as, we've had catastrophic failures. Heck, we have lost school days because we had no power, because our facilities are essentially substandard in terms of power backup. So, it has impacts. We lose school days. But this is not, we want to be united and solve this funding issue together, I think.
A question or more comment about the architecture fees. It's a one-time fee.
Right.
And I don't think because we should be passing on to tax burden this one-time fee. If you're gonna be increasing 14%, then after 2 years, you got your 760. Are you gonna decrease your, the taxes for the citizen after that? Most likely not. Decrease never takes a place here. So it's a one-time fees, and I think the town should look into this, and either pitching in or helping us identify the funds, or maybe we look into alternatives of how much we can raise. I know time is an essence here, but it's, if there's an increase for this purpose only in taxes, then it's a wrong thing to us unless we're gonna decrease the taxes afterwards.
I think that the fact that it's a one-time fee is actually a really relevant point in terms of
Yeah.
how and when you handle that. Because that's not a permanent increase to your budget. And this seems like a challenging year for a significant one-time increase.
Right.
I just want to add that one-time fee aside, in terms of coming up with a number for the voters. As John said, we're almost at minimal receiving there's hardly any, next year, there won't be much change, pray to God, so let's say we did have a 10% increase, 10.8. And then next year, if we are consistent with, as we are this year, next year, we can basically say this is what it's gonna be and have more control in the future. So my point is, I feel like the town is at a crossroads where it has to decide, this is a hard year. This is a year where we're gonna have to spend more if this is what the town wants. And I feel like the majority of the town does want to support the education and vibrancy of attracting new families into our town. So I'm less afraid of, having a tax increase that is higher than usual, because I see this as an exceptional year, a third year in a row. I'm not saying I'm comfortable with 10.8, I'm not comfortable with a huge increase, period. But my sense is that there's a large majority of the people in the town who are willing to put, the value on it, on education in this town. And if it's framed in such a way that this is an exceptional year, that we might win some people over that way.
I agree with you that most taxpayers will be willing to pay to support what's missing here. And it's a question for Catherine.
I'm sorry, I'm not even talking about what's missing, I'm talking about as is.
As is, exactly.
Yeah.
Not enough from this list,
Yeah.
but from what's missing from the state.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where was I going with the point?
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Catherine, you said.
Yeah, there's a missing portion of it. I don't know, I guess I'll come back to it. I'm doing it right now. Yeah, when Rebecca said here that we, or every school in the state, more or less have to learn how to pay up 55%. So are we paying 55% of our education?
No, I think you misunderstood.
Oh, you
and
misunderstood, okay.
The state is supposed to pay
Right.
55%,
Okay,
That's their goal.
but they
Yes.
don't,
But they haven't
they
been.
do.
ever.
So they pay 55% on an aggregate basis for the state,
But they
not-
don't actually
yeah.
do that.
They don't even.
Or that was the target, but
Okay.
on any individual district, it's very
So
different.
what percentage are we paying for our own education right now?
About 91?
Um,
Yeah.
it's yeah,
Okay.
no, it's actually more like 95.
Okay, forget about it.
With this proposed, sorry, that's based on this proposed budget.
Yes.
The prior year, it was, I think, 87%, something like that.
Because you can't exactly go on the state funding
Yeah.
report, because that's based on their EPS amount saying that we
Right.
need to spend 16 million to get a good school, and we spend almost 25 million. And on that report, they're saying that the state share is 5%. So we have a much higher budget than what they say, so it's actually probably more like 97%.
Do we need to take a break, Jack?
Yes,